I'm working on NeoMecha, a turn-based strategy trying to capture the spirit of G Gundam. Previously, I got the combat to a point where it was okay, and not the worst part of the game, which means it's time to replace some programmer art. Let's jump in. This is what I started with: white and gray tiles, basic programmer art. To get an idea of what I was aiming for, I referenced the art of Christopher Henry. A link to his Instagram is in the description. His art is amazing, and I tried to take some lessons from his work. Dark blue, almost black colors, with lots of colorful neon signs, and irregular building shapes. Because my design skills are minimal, I started with an asset pack I found on itch.io. The colors are pretty bland, but it has plenty of signs and lots of interesting building shapes. The road tiles are more for a city, and NeoMecha is going to be set in an arena. I made sure to ignore any sidewalks or manholes while reworking the colors. I also added a few empty tiles, as well as some corner pieces. I took all this and put it into the tiled map, and the result was looking pretty good. The goal was to make something that looked fairly industrial, and the thick road lines worked well for that. I started working on buildings. At first I just took some building modules and created a building. The result was decent, but not right. NeoMecha is set in an arena. There shouldn't be a shop in the middle of the arena. I went and found a more abstract building module to work from, and it turned out better. But the color was too blue. I had to remember, dark blue, almost black. After all that, I tried importing the new tiles into the tiled map editor, but I had a problem. Tiled references the frame number of each tile, and I tried to do some work on the tile highlights, causing the frame numbers to change, and my map to break in tiled. I had to take a detour and update my asset importer to create a separate sprite sheet just for tiles that are used by tiled. Now, as long as the relative order of the tiles doesn't change, I can add or remove as many frames as I want. Alright, time to add some signs. I took the signs from the asset pack almost unmodified. Later I'm going to do a whole pass making the signs better, but right now I just want to get them in the game. I copied over 4 signs of different colors to get started with. Okay, time to bring this all into the game. Let me fix that. Much better. It's looking pretty good, but we still need signs. Signs are a new concept, so I need to write some code to import them. And some code to make them destructible. Now that everything is in the game, things are looking pretty good, except for tile highlights. The highlights were designed to be on top of a light color, and now the tiles are dark. I flipped the color, changed the design to be less busy, and animated it when you hover over. I don't love the new design of the tile highlight, but the tile set looks pretty good overall. Let's move on for now. This was my first placeholder mech. Early on I tried to just draw it better, and ended up with this. It's marginally better, but nowhere near the quality I wanted. I really put off thinking about how I was going to draw the mechs, until I remembered the old game trick of pre-rendered sprites. Some games would design and animate characters in 3D software, and then render them out into sprite sheets. While I couldn't find any Gundam-like isometric sprite assets, there are plenty of 3D models out there. I picked a 4-pack off of ArtStation and imported it into Blender. Then I realized they weren't rigged. I went back and found one that was rigged and brought that into Blender. Blender proved to be a bit difficult, and I had to redo a few poses because I didn't know what I was doing. But the process worked. I was able to pose the model, set up cameras, and get the rendered image into Sprite, where I could do a draw over and match the rest of the game's art style. This process took longer than I expected. Excluding my learning time with Blender, each frame took about 1 to 2 hours. I originally planned to do this for each frame, but because of how long it took, I decided to flip frames and cut the time in half. At first, I didn't like the result. It really looked like a cheap Gundam ripoff, which I guess that's what it is. I had to remind myself that it's about progress, not perfection. What I made was way better than what I had before, and I could always do another pass and make it better. With that done, for now at least, I moved on to adding some missing animations in the game. So far, the animations were just enough to show you that something happened, but not enough to show you what was going on. Time to improve that. This is what the melee attack looked like before. A single frame that flashed for 1/10 of a second. Now I've added an anticipation frame and increased the frame duration so they can actually see the animation. This is what the block looked like before. There wasn't anything. Now there's an animation. Again, with the smoke action, there wasn't any animation or even a projectile. Now there's both an animation and a projectile. Once again, with the death animation, there wasn't one. The game just kinda ended. Now there's an animation. Nothing says cyberpunk more than lots of glowing neon signs. To make the signs glow, I need a lighting system. Over the years, I've saved links to a few monogame XNA lighting tutorials. Unfortunately, all but one of my links are dead. But the one that still works is to a library called Penumbra, and I can just import that. Unfortunately, its documentation says it's incompatible with my version of monogame. But luckily, after doing some Googling, I found that Penumbra has actually been updated to the latest version of monogame. Its documentation just needs to be updated. The first problem I hit with Penumbra was that it immediately crashes. But at least Penumbra is open source, and I can just look at the code and see what's going on. It doesn't seem to work the same way that the samples do, but I can adjust for that. Penumbra was working at this point, but I still couldn't see my lights. It turns out that dark colors don't show up well on a dark background. I switched my lights to a light color, and I could finally see them. I also had to turn off the fog of war. I implemented it by drawing the tiles that weren't visible in a darker color, and Penumbra works by creating a color overlay. The two combined their colors, and everything was just super dark. I originally put in the fog of war because I envisioned a multiplayer mode with 2 phases. A starting phase, where you don't know where your opponent is, and you're trying to get a drop on them. Then once you've found each other, you would start the combat phase. But given how long it's taken to get NeoMecha this far, I've had to drop plans for multiplayer. Without multiplayer, there's no real need for the fog of war, because in single player, an AI opponent knows where you are and makes choices with that information. I want the player to have the same level of information that the AI does. That is why I added the radar. Removing the fog of war adds to the information the player has, and that sounds like a good change. Back to lighting. I had to change the intensity of the lights. A value of 1 seemed like a good number, but it made the lights so bright they lost their color. I dropped the intensity down to 0.25, and things started to look close to what I wanted. Unfortunately, I ended up with way too many lights and the frame rate dropped. I had to cut the number of lights in the scene, so I removed the ground lights. Later I might try to do some performance improvements and add them back in, but for now they're out. Okay, neon signs are looking pretty good. I need to start wrapping up this version. I quickly added a light to the blaster, and that looks pretty awesome. I should add lights to every attack, but I'll do that later in a VFX pass. For now, I added a light to the mechs just so they aren't lost in the background. Later, I'm going to have to find a way to incorporate lights into the mech design, but that's a later thing. With that, I called lighting done for now, and I moved on to some miscellaneous fixes. Now that I have a dark tile set, titles were pretty much invisible. I made new ones, and not just black text this time. I made the new titles in the same style as the logo. I even switched out Search and Destroy for Ready Go with the sound effect from G Gundam to try and set the mood.
Ready, go!
I'll record my own voiceover later. While looking for bugs to clean up, I found one where the lights were not being cleaned up after switching scenes. At first, I just tried to clean up the lights before leaving the scene, but that caused two issues. The lights turned off before exiting the scene, and I couldn't get all the lights for some reason, so I resorted to a nuclear option. I added an event to the scene manager and dropped all the lights and all the holes right before I exited the scene. It's a bit overkill, but all the lights go away. I then swapped in the new map to replace the white box map on the other levels. And this was a long version. I greatly underestimated how much time art would take. This version took over 100 hours, 25 hours more than my previous longest version, and over double the average of 46 hours. I will definitely make the next version smaller. Anyways, if you made it this far, thanks for watching, and if you want to see more, like and subscribe.